Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we're taking a look at some cards that are looking like they're going to be more meta relevant down the road. I know that we just got Supreme Darkness, and we still are constantly seeing hype for different cards that support some of the cards and archetypes from that set. But we also have to remember that we have the BlueEyes deck coming out not too far away. That should be next month. And we're also in the middle of getting reveals for Alliance Insight over in the OCG, which is the next core set that we should be getting around May of this year. We are always trying to be as forward looking as possible, so we want to know what cards and themes are going to be getting support so that we can act accordingly early on. Let's get started. Kicking things off, let's take a look at High Speedroid Chanara. So this card is meant to be for the Speedroid archetype, obviously, but it's actually a generic level 5 machine synchro monster that's currently being talked about for the Crystron strategy. It's a level 5, so it's really easy to make, and it's able to attack twice during each battle phase. This means that this card alone is able to attack for 4,000 damage, which helps the deck to push for game a little bit more easily. Now, this isn't something that's popped up in too many of the OCG Crystron deck lists that I've been looking at, but here in the TCG, of course, the game is a bit different, and it's definitely possible that some of the tech options and such will be very different over here. Chanara is a card that's very easily accessible here in the TCG, as it has a super rare printing from Shadows in Valhalla and 2 common printings, all of which are very easy to find. However, it's the highest rarity version of Chanara that was recently bought out. Historically, this card is only a couple of dollars, but earlier this week we saw it hit $20 lowest on TCG Player, though the most that the card actually sold for according to the sold listings was around $10, and that's around where the price seems to have settled back down to. Personally, I'm not convinced that Crystron is going to be that crazy of a deck, so I'm not expecting them to get too much attention. If you are interested in trying them out, maybe pick up a super rare or common copy for yourself to play with instead, and let the hype around this card die down. Up next, we have one of the more notable cards from this past week. It's Shiningarcophagus. So this card is the key card for its own archetype, which includes cards that mention Shiningarcophagus in their text. These cards are meant to be retrains of the monsters that Yugi dueled with. So we have Gadget Trio to represent the gadgets, there's a Dark Magician, and a bunch of other different things. Well, just announced in Alliance Insight is the next piece for the theme, the Dark Magician Girl retrain. It's actually a pretty solid card, as it can be special summoned by discarding any other card from your hand, and it searches for a Shiningarcophagus on summon. Even aside from the artwork that will most likely be censored, I think that this card and the archetype as a whole will see a decent amount of demand, especially since more casual players that are fans of the anime will likely be big on this card. Of course, Shiningarcophagus is one of the most important cards to actually play the deck, searching for a card and turning on a bunch of the monster's effects. Unfortunately though, this card is a relatively new card from Legacy of Destruction, so it has just one printing that has seen a pretty notable price bump over the last week or so. The secrets have generally sat at around the $15 to $17 mark. Those are basically now up to $25 on TCG Player. With the QCRs, those have shot up even more, as they were around $30 to $40 before, but right now they're more than double that at $80 to $90 a piece. This theme isn't something that you buy into because you're expecting them to be meta relevant, right? I think that they still aren't going to be that great even with the new card, but there will be people that pull certain cards from the set or certain cards from the archetype, and therefore they will be after the rest of the cards once Alliance Insight comes out. However, we do have to still keep in mind that this card and the rest of the archetypes cards should be included in the 2025 tins, so we want to be careful with how long we're holding on to these cards for, if at all. I do want to take a second to remind all of you to check out our website, MSTmerch.com. Now, over at MSTmerch.com, we have everything that you will need to optimize your Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament experience. We have the basics with white, black, pink, and our new purple matted sleeves, which are my personal favorites, as well as smooth and matted sleeves to double sleeve your valuable cards and sleeves with for tournament play. But we also have some other items that you can really use to customize your collection. We have amazing foil sleeves, including some with the MST.TV logo, and dividers and subdividers so that you can keep your collection perfectly organized and easily accessible. Regardless of if you're a competitive or casual player, I'm certain that you'll find something that you will enjoy over at MSTmerch.com. Alright, next up I want to talk a little bit about Malice White Rabbit. So all 3 of the archetypes from Crossover Breakers each got 2 new support cards revealed to be coming in Alliance Insight, and holy crap, the 2 new Malice cards are really amazing. Malice in the current format feels like a tier 1.5 or tier 2 strategy. It's a clear step behind Fiendsmith Ryuga, but they're not a bad strategy by any means. However, I think that by the time May comes, which is when we should be getting Alliance Insight, we should see some sort of hits to Ryuga, probably no hits to Malice, and so we should expect to see Malice rise up and be able to at least compete with Ryuga for a spot at tier 1. White Rabbit is a very important 3-of for the Malice deck, able to set a trap directly from the deck on summon, as well as the standard effect of summoning itself back when it is banished. This is the most expensive card in lowest rarity for the theme. It's generally going to be that big obstacle that prevents players from putting the deck together. Now, for a little while there, the Malice cards were actually trending downwards. White Rabbit was up at 45 to 50, but since the deck hasn't really been performing too crazy, I believe that White Rabbits were heading down towards $35 a piece. However, looking at the card on TCG Player right now, the card is starting to get low on quantities and is likely going to continue moving upwards over the next few months. There's a couple of listings at 35, but then there's a bunch of unverified sellers before the card is at 40. Let's be real, guys, this is a waifu archetype that also has the potential to be the best deck in the entire game, so it's definitely something that's going to see a crazy amount of demand, and it really wouldn't surprise me to see this card back up at $50 a piece. Keep in mind that the set and the archetype are also brand new, so we shouldn't expect to see the cards reprinted for the foreseeable future, which is going to in turn keep these prices high. Speaking of archetypes from Crossover Breakers, the next card we have is Sosei Ryuga Mistva. I feel kind of bad for the Ryuga archetype, honestly. They're kind of like that third forgotten theme from the set after Ryuga and Malice. However, the new Ryuga cards actually seem really good. They may not be enough to make the deck top tier, but at the very least, they provide some way to help the deck not just fold to a single hand trap. I actually got to play against this deck at my locals this past weekend, and they were able to put up this crazy big board that I just wasn't able to push through with Fiendsmith Ryuga. With Mistva, this was one of the cheaper cards in the set. Not as cheap as Heartscriptor, but it was only a couple of dollars, which really shouldn't surprise anybody since the Ryuga theme only got 1 out of 10 ultra rare slots. However, with the new support cards, Mistva is starting to trend upwards. This was at $2 to $3 before, but it's now actually up at around $6 to $8 per copy. With this one, I'm not saying that I expect Mistva to be a $20 card overnight, but I do think that there will be some more demand for the card once Alliance Insight does drop in May. If you do have people at your locals that just threw this card into their holo bulk, see if you can pick these up for a couple of dollars or try to dig them out, since it definitely seems to be like something that is mostly forgotten about. Okay, so here's what I want to touch on quickly. It's BlueEyes Spirit Dragon, but specifically the QCR printing. So of course we have the BlueEyes structure deck coming out next month, and I think it's one of the most hyped structure decks that we've had in a long time. Not only is the deck really good in the OCG, but it's BlueEyes, which is arguably the most iconic monster in the entire game. Now, one of the key cards for the theme is BlueEyes Spirit Dragon, which is one of the boss monsters for the deck. It's a level 9 synchro that requires the non-tuner to be a Blue Eyes monster. It prevents summoning 2 or more monsters at a time. It can negate the effect of a card that activates in the graveyard, and it can cheat out light dragon synchro monsters from your extra deck. Now, I believe that this is either played at 2 or 3 in the Blue Eyes extra deck, so something that a lot of players are going to need multiple copies of. Luckily, this card was reprinted in Rarity Collection 2, so if you just want to own a copy of the card to use, it's actually pretty cheap. However, the QCR version of the card has done nothing but climb in price. Early on, this was only $15 or so. When we looked at it a couple of months ago, it was up at around $30 to $40, but even then the card has continued to climb even further and now sits at $65 on TCG Player. Naturally, Blue Eyes players are wanting to bling out their decks, and the QCR printing is absolutely beautiful, so it's something that is in incredibly high demand. If Blue Eyes is a top tier strategy and actually does manage to perform here in the TCG, just like it did in the OCG, I could definitely see this card getting even more expensive, so it's ultimately going to be up to you guys to decide what rarity you feel comfortable holding on to for yourself to play with. Up next, we have number 105 Batland Boxer Star Cestus. So I think a bunch of people may have forgotten about it, but we have Maze of the Master coming out in March of this year, and with it comes a new spell card in 7th Tachyon. It allows you to reveal a number monster between 101 and 107, and then search for a monster that matches the type or attribute, as well as the level with its rank. So before this, one of the main cards we saw being used is number 104 Masquerade, and you could use that to search for either Ice or X Ryziel as light monsters. However, number 105 is now being teched into some Ryziel extra decks over in the OCG, because it means that you can search for either Node or Sword Ryziel. This seems unnecessary, but I can see how this would be useful if you need to play through multiple hand traps, maybe you got hit by Nib at a really bad time. Now here in the TCG, the Fiendsmith Ryziel deck is really popular, Fiendsmith being quite a big package. I don't know if we would have room for this card. Maybe if the Fiendsmith stuff does get hit and pure Ryziel becomes more popular, this card could be a thing. Now this card does have a few different printings. The main two are the holos from Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy and then the tins from that year. Both of those are supers, and either one is going to cost you around $5 to $7 right now. That price has been trending upwards over the last 3 months or so. Aside from that, this card was a common in Soul Burning Volcano, so that printing is literally going to be bulk. I don't think that this is something that's going to see all that much play, so personally, I would just hold on to a set of the commons just in case you need to use it, but look to offload the supers for some free value while you can. And finally, the last card is Tri-Brigade Farragut the Barren Blossom. So this card is a Link 2 monster. Unfortunately, Tri-Brigade hasn't been all that relevant recently, so we are not talking about it for that deck. Rather, all that we care about is its effect if it is sent to the graveyard, where we can draw a card and then place a card from hand to the bottom of the deck. So right now this card is being talked about as a tech card in certain extra decks looking to make use of Dogmatica Maximus, specifically the Mitsurugi Ryziel deck. They already play cards like Garura and Herald of the Arclight, but this card lets you dig a little bit deeper as well as put back something like a Night Sword Serpent that you actually want to be in your deck so you can mill it out later. The other cool thing is that this is probably one of the better Link monsters that you can send with Ultimate Slayer. So for example, against Malice, you can out a Nightmare Griffin and dump Farragut and filter your hand in the process, which is really cool. So yeah, this is a card that I personally am really fond of, and I do think it's something that's going to see more usage in the future. Despite this though, it's actually a really cheap card right now. Either the original ultra rare printing or the reprint tin secret rare is only $1 or $2. I could definitely see that going higher if the Mitsurugi Ryziel deck really does prove to be that popular. This is something for you guys to maybe look at picking up a few copies of as we move towards the Supreme Darkness format. Alright guys, that is all we have for today's episode. Definitely some fun stuff coming up. I was super excited to see all of the new support for the older archetypes, especially those 2 Malice cards. I guess they're not really an old archetype, but the Malice stuff definitely makes it seem like that deck is going to be one of the best decks of the year 2025. So super excited to see how the format evolves over in the OCG so that we can know how things will change here in the TCG as well. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.